Hello and welcome to A Book Worth Reading, the extended edition. I've just come here on this lovely evening for me and with my friend Lissie behind the camera to talk a little bit about some books that don't feature at the festival but I think are really worth reading and just worth your time, and sort of a curated selection. They're all in translation, obviously. They're all by women, and there's sort of a range of genres and a range of ages that they were written for, but very readable by absolutely everyone. And these, I've all picked them because they are special is such an inadequate word, but important for different reasons. So the first one I want to pull on is this book by, I'll put a little image down below or something so you can see it. I know it's a little bit dark, but it's called Wondrous Journeys in Strange Lands by Sonia Nimr, translated by Marcia, Lynx, Qualey. And it's a episodic book. It's a bit like sort of in the tradition of like a myths and legends. So she's a Palestinian writer, and her character starts off in Palestine, and then each sort of chapter makes her way to Egypt, to India, and back to Palestine. Like she does this like journey, a bit like, it's probably a hero's quest thing, isn't it, really? And it's slightly absurd, you know, so like in the way that like sort of myths and legends can be, none of these things could have really happened to one person in their whole life. They're larger than life. It's a really special book, and it's written for children, but like with all children's books, more or less, there is a huge amount to be gained by an adult reading them, and this book's really special. And I think Sonia Nimr is a really special writer as well. She's written quite a lot of books. There's one called Gadar and the Gŵyl, the Ghouls. There is sort of folk tales from Palestine as well. So that's my very strong recommendation. It's a little bit hard to get hold of, but very much worth the effort. We're going to stay in Palestine, but move to a little bit of a different book. This one is called Minor Detail by Adania, Shibli, and translated by the lovely Lissie, Jaquette. Again, a Palestinian writer. This one, I would say, I think I've given it to you, haven't I, Lucy, to read before? Yeah, have you read it?
I don't know.
No, I don't think so. I think you'd remember if you had. It's in two parts. The first part is a woman in 1949, and sort of when the British Army are occupying. Is that a nod?
You've definitely told me about it.
And then the second half is a woman in present day who's sort of tracing this woman's story. And it's an incredible story, but actually, like, what I loved about it is I think that the first half of the book is incredibly well written. There's a certain, I've definitely said this at Gŵyl before, but there's a certain style of writing I really love, which is sparse, it's tight, it's just simple as well. It's very simple language, and I know that actually she had a big argument about I remember talking to Lissie, Jaquette, and she said that she was translating something as like the shadow moved and the soldier followed it, or something like that. And like Adania Shibli has thought so much about this that she was like, there shouldn't be a cause and effect. The shadow moves, the soldier moves, without like, that's sort of explained badly, but like it's this first half, like the way I always think about it is, because for me, reading Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea when I was 12 was like a very formative book experience. And, you know, Hemingway, there are all the correct reasons to condone Hemingway, but tell you what, The Old Man and the Sea is a very excellent piece of writing. And the first half of this book in particular, I think, reaches that stratosphere and reaches that just beautiful writing. So yeah, with this book there is definitely sort of for everybody who is a woman, non-binary, trans, you know, non-hetero, I would say that like this book and the next book that I'm going to talk about, Woman at Point Zero, should not be read when you are feeling a little bit vulnerable or a little bit weak not, you know, like not weak in the like, like you need to be feeling up to these books. I think that you will enjoy them and actually potentially get more than your sort of like cis man would from these books, because they are representative of like that feeling, and more than that feeling, those experiences. But yeah, that's a sort of recommendation. Read it when you're feeling up to reading something a little bit upsetting, to say the least. Which brings on to my next book, Women at Point Zero by Nawal El Saadwadi. This is translated by Sherif Hetata, and this has gotten a little bit of attention because she sadly passed away this year, and that's actually like where I came to read it, because I was sort of on my radar and I was like, better get to this one now. And I think there's a lot to recommend this book. The thing that stays with me is that it is the most accurate portrayal of what it feels like to constantly be facing violence in your life daily, and then to break. And actually, although we have not all been through what this central character has been, there's something it asks philosophically about sort of the inevitable end point of violence being violence, a violent retribution. And actually I felt quite called by this book to sort of be like, yeah, you know, it sort of does reach this end point that I agree with, that is sort of in the face of like desperation and loss of everything and loss of your power, your control, who you are. There is only one answer, and that like she achieves her freedom through enacting violence back, and through giving up on surviving in a world that is nothing but violent to you. This is definitely a book that I think everybody should read. I think it's one of those like core experiences books that sort of defines how us women and non-binary folks move through the world. On a sort of like slightly, oh no, I was going to say on a nice note, but then I looked at the stories and there wasn't any that were more hopeful, because literally the next one I was going to pick up is Hurricane Season. Which, like, after I read Hurricane Season, the thing I said was like, I love this book, I entirely agree with it, but I can't live my life without this much hope, like with this complete absence of hope, and that like I have to have more hope as I like go through my life, even when I agree with it in its entirety and agree completely with its sort of conclusions. So Hurricane Season by Fernanda, Melchior, and translated by Sophie Hughes, is a fictionalized story that she was inspired to write by a real life report that said that this witch had been murdered in a village in Mexico, and everything about the report just sort of assumed that she was a witch and took it for granted that she was a witch, and didn't have in any sort of like issues with sort of like understanding her as a witch, and that's sort of an entry presence into it. This book is like Minor Detail, it's incredibly written. Like it's, you know, it goes into these like what do you call it, like upper echelons of writing. Fernanda Melchior is incredible.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. And there's sort of the things that get picked up in the press are like, oh, it's really unique, it like doesn't use paragraphs, it's got like these 6 sections and stuff, but like that's really unimportant, because the reason it's doing those things is to serve the story. And this wasn't a book where she was like, oh, I'm gonna like do something new with like language for sort of playing with it. It's like it serves the story. You read this like because that's how it feels, that's how the people experience it, and you sort of put things together, so you move through all these different characters' points of view, and each time you think you understand something, it then gets reframed by the new information you have from sort of hearing the same story from other people's points of view. But yeah, it's more a hopeful book, but it's a very real one, and it interacts with gender and sort of sexuality and poverty and class, and it's one I'll always recommend, I think. Yeah, Lucy's halfway through it, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last fiction I have to recommend is The Mussel Feast by Birgit Vanderbeke and translated by Joseph Bulloch, I think. Let me just check that one. Jamie Bulloch. So this is essentially like a monologue of a book. So Pyrini, who publish it, only publish books that like you could read in the time it would take you to watch a film. That's their kind of concept. And this one is a film in, if it was like, you know, a 12 Angry Men style film where it's one shot, it's one setting, it's one evening, and it's brilliant. It's really brilliant. You can take quite a lot of different things from this book. You know, that sort of, there is a political way of reading it. It's set during the fall of or it was written during the fall of the Berlin Wall, so there's a political way, analogy way in which to read it, but there is also very crucially a much broader story about family and about gender and the role that marriage plays in our society in sort of constraining everybody's lives and dictating everybody's lives and the ways in which that fails everybody. Yeah. Would you like to add anything about this one?
I think it's fantastic, and I think it is a really good criticism of the nuclear family and the setup of that. But you go through a journey to get there, and it is a journey, and it takes you to so many different places, and you feel at the end like you almost come to your own revelation, which is exciting.
Yeah, exactly. So then I have a book of poetry, Adelia Prado, The Mystical Rose. I picked this up by accident, didn't know anything about Adelia Prado, and she's quite well known and well loved in Brazil, but she sort of just wrote poetry herself and then was quote unquote discovered in all the connotations that has, and when she was 40, she's now 85, and despite not being 85, despite not growing up in Brazil or growing up in a Catholic family, which are all sort of themes and like strong rootedness in this, this is amazing. I just resonated straight away with it and couldn't get enough of it, and I think it's my favourite poetry I've read in maybe just my favourite poetry I've read, maybe just a full stop at the end of that. Yeah, serious, like, yeah, I think she's she does everything that I want from poetry, I think. Then we have a non-fiction recommendation, because I was like, well, you know, I've got to slot one in there. This is Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner by Katrine Marçal. It's translated from Swedish by Saskia Vogel of Saskia Vogel. You'll see her books around places if you go into bookshops. So the basic premise of this is Adam Smith is an economist who wrote The Wealth of Nations, which in economics is sort of seen as, in some ways, like the start of economics and certainly the start of like modern economic theory. And basically the premise is that Adam Smith lived his whole life with his mother, and she cared for him, nurtured him, fed him, all of that kind of thing. And so this is a lesson that we see in basically all thinkers ever. Anyone who ever had the time to like sit down and write, your Karl Marxes, right? Like, they don't have a 9-to-5 job, and they don't support themselves, and they are supported by other people around them, which lets them write and think. and that's the basic premise, and that sort of that then extrapolates into everyday life as well. So it's about the sort of economic labour, the hidden labour of women, and the way in which that is not counted by economics, and that is not counted as genuine labour or genuine work. So I really enjoy this book. Katrine is a brilliant speaker. If you get a chance to, like, she speaks English and she does lots of events in English, and I would highly recommend searching out an event she's in, and that sort of so I happen to study partially economics at university, and I don't mean it lightly when I sort of say that it is not. The vast majority of economics as a discipline is not a valid discipline. It is founded on assumptions that are incredibly incorrect, and then it goes into mathematical assumptions based on those assumptions, which then are obviously incredibly incorrect. There is good work being done in economics, in environmental economics, in sort of labour economics, I like work economics. There is good socialist thinking there, but like economics as a discipline is like fundamentally flawed, and they want to understand it, and they want people to not be able to understand it, and to make it a sort of science, and that's like very clearly like an agenda that people like decided they were going to make economics a science rather than the social science it really is and where it belongs, and there's a lot of twisted logic at the heart of that. So Katrine Marçal doing a little bit of work to sort of deconstruct that. So those are my recommendations for a book worth reading. I did actually bring a few other books down that might be of interest. They're sort of like my to be read list that I thought people might just be interested in. I'll sort of quickly go through them. They're like the next coming up on me. So this is Notes of a Crocodile by Shu Maojin, and this is a sort of queer lesbian text. I've sort of seen some incredible reviews of this. It seemed like a no-brainer. I've also seen some sort of reviews that amount to like teenage angst, and I think it's probably somewhere in between and a little bit of both. So I've had a little dabble and looking forward to getting into that more. I have stolen a hot piece of advice I have for anyone who's looking to sort of read books that they aren't going to find in Waterstones, or like aren't going to find like sort of recommended else places, is to find university reading lists. University reading lists tend to be freely available if you like find the right, so you pick a university, you work out a module, and then if you Google like that module's name with reading list, you can often find them. So for this one I perused my sister's reading list. She studies Spanish and Portuguese. She was quite annoyed. She was like, how dare you, you're like stealing my book. But anyway, some books that led me to getting was Christina Perry Rossi's The Ship of Fools, Mothers and Shadows by Marta Traba. So those are those two. Sort of Latin American is what I was particularly looking for there off reading lists. And then I have Anna Ides, who I don't know very much about. It's a classic work of Hungarian literature, apparently. And it obviously appealed at some point because I put it in the cart. And then I have this Chinese book, Wedding in Autumn and Other Stories, by Shu Changyu. So yeah, those are the ones I'm going to read soon, and I hope that you have found something here that interests you, or sort of like gets you thinking about what maybe you would like to read next. So those are my books worth reading. See you all soon. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.